Gary described to you one of our tools that we'll use to match these proposed and existing launch system to the scenarios. Remember I mentioned to you, we got a bunch of materials, briefings, data, and talking of which, you know, this is a very small team, so I'm grateful to NASA guys, Jeff, your team, Ralph Rowe's team, who is, I don't see Ralph, were very instrumental to us getting knowledge, getting up to speed quickly, so I'm grateful for that. One chart that Gary showed to you that showed this potential impacts to IOC from 3 different areas. One was insufficient budget. That probably is not in your control, Jeff. Somebody higher salary level at NASA or beyond has to work that. There was another one, ISS extension. That also may not be on your plate to decide. But there's one area that was very significant, and that's technical risks. That one is on your plate, Jeff. So, but that's the one that you can exercise most of control. And that's the one that is your ability to control those risks were not necessarily affected in Gary's pitch, because he just sees, here is the risks, that's what they mean statistically to your IOC, but you can improve that one. So let me quickly go, and like I say, we still have one more briefing from Ed to go tomorrow, which will paint those beyond LEO scenarios. But trying to get ready for him, we have done a little bit of a looking at, say, how would you match 1 or 2 launch vehicles so that they can start serving his scenarios, and I have some idea where he's heading. So, for example, you look at the program of record, there is 1 and there is 5, and you know, comments that I don't want to say, I really could have had budget / cost. I could have had budget. Budget problem created you a cost problem. The second one is a potential is dual launch that most of you guys heard of, and this is something of order of Ares 5 Lite. Some people affectionately call it, and that causes you a problem for ISS. So now you will have to look, can we put together a set of launch vehicles from the commercial arena that will serve the ISS? And then you have this another potential for dual launches is a very nice future program, the Heavy Atlas, phase 2, a heavy lifter. Now that one might have a lower cost, but then you have a marginal performance. The one thing I have learned over this lengthy, laborious career of mine, get margin. See, don't set yourself on a path with almost no margin, because that's the lowest cost, and then you spend the rest of your career living, laboring, trying to unbury yourself. So this is why I'm talking robustness, margin. Those are virtue of a good management, believe it or not. And sometimes you learn about it too late in your career. And the last one is, which, to be honest with you, as an American, I'm not sure I'm all that warm to. Don't build any big launch vehicles. Look, use as HLV or commercial mid-sized vehicles. Stimulate commercial. It creates a mission complexity for this beyond LEO mission success, because you are talking about massive amount of logistics trying to send a lot of smaller vehicles to low Earth orbit, so you can, and some of our colleagues are warm to the idea. I've got a little bit of a difficulty to think that this is the best way for the country. So let me just give you, we are not through. Ed will talk, then we will do the integration between our teams, but just some things, preliminary observations or findings. Insufficient funding for the constellation to achieve ISS and lunar IOC with a reasonable gap. Just so you know what I consider reasonable gap. I think 2015 is too long, but I say in context of this statement is like it will probably blow 2016, and that's what my reasonable definition sort of starts falling apart. And in spite of its technical and budgetary problems, I probably should have had them reversed. Your budget problems, in my opinion, are bigger than your technical problems. Constellation, you have matured enough, and I've seen you guys for the last 2 years, that could be successful given adequate funding. And let me just mention this technical, your technical challenges. I was buried in technical problems during shuttle development. Shuttle was more complex system than the Ares 1 and Orion is. It was, first of all, it was new, it was different, it was much more complicated. So if you think you are overwhelmed by your thrust oscillations and your acoustics and your drift, relax. Those are solvable if you pay attention, if you address yourself and have enough money to do that. NASA, and this is broader NASA. NASA needs to address this detrimental effect of this fixed costs on execution of major programs. You have this fixed cost component that is more than half of Jeff Henley's budget. You know, when shuttle ends, all this stuff falls on his back, and NASA needs to address it. That's a significant drag on your ability to do what you commit yourself to do. And just one other comment, the last observation is, if NASA mission or the implementation of that mission is changed, and it may be by the new administration, resulting changes to Constellation launch system will have a very significant impact on cost and schedule. You will have a perturbation that is going to last, in my judgment, somewhere between 1.5 years and 2 years, and there will be a lot of instability, a lot of impact on the workforce. Some of these cases may affect industrial base capability of America. So just let's walk into it with open eyes. And in a summary, we have identified these commercial and government vehicles. We got data that we wanted, probably more than we wanted, but we have it. Aerospace independent evaluation conducted. Gary gave us more than he was able to present here because some of this is proprietary stuff and we don't want him to get in trouble. Beyond LEO, I've said it enough times, beyond LEO, an SSP team scenario will drive selection of the launch vehicles. We have identified either criteria or filters for this selection and proposed match of what we think we ought to have in terms of launch vehicles with those scenarios identified by the two teams will be deliberated in DC meeting. And Mr. Chairman, I know you always value margin. Well, I'm turning 6 minutes of margin back to you, sir.
Thank you, Bo. I do value margin a lot. I always call it reserves, but margin is just as good or better a term. Well, thank you. It was a very helpful presentation. And as you pointed out, you've touched the tip of the iceberg compared with what we've had available in preparation for this meeting, so that we didn't have to make this meeting a 7-day affair. I think the committee also owes a special thanks to the Aerospace Corporation for a very professional job. We've asked you to do something in an awfully short period of time, and it would have been tempting to say you just can't do that, and that's virtually true, but what you have done is, I think, been very, very helpful. I guess I could also say that your lawyers would be proud of you with all the caveats you offered. So, but that's the nature of the affair. I think we've probably got some questions. We have your 6 minutes of reserve, and we'll take a little bit more. We'll lead into the program and do what you always do here. We'll cut spares and trading and so on, and take a little more time. So I've got several questions, but I'll hold mine to last. Who would like to? Okay, Les.
I figure. Bo or Gary,
in... me, Gary, here, so I don't do this. Go ahead.
In some other discussions, there was an expression of a need for a new launch strategy, national launch strategy, broad area review, or BAR, for the country. I think the last time one was done was 2002, 2003 timeframe. Do you think that that's a valid suggestion or recommendation for the nation in general, not just for NASA? And if so, do you think that this would be sort of the body of the analysis that would fit into such a review?
Well, I'll take a crack at it, and then if you have to. I think it's a worthwhile thing to look at American capability, our nation's capability. If that doesn't detract, doesn't slow down NASA from doing its mission, it could enhance because you get a very value for the country where you look at DOD and NASA, as long as it doesn't, like I say, slow down the progress at NASA. That's my view. Anything you want to add to it?
To say that the broad area review that was accomplished previously was enormously beneficial. It helped us understand where we were and what we needed to do. So those kinds of looks really are helpful, but they do take time and a lot of effort and energy. But certainly the output of that is a useful thing for the community as it decides a path forward.
Any questions from anyone?
Wanda?
Audience?
Yes, I have a question. Bo, in your charts, you indicated that using the commercial marketplace for human lift is a drastic change. And, you know, the circumstance that we find ourselves in is that if we keep doing what we've always done, we'll continue to get what we always got. So it would suggest that it's...
You know, Wanda, I gotta get closer. I'm sorry, the
It's
acoustics,
okay.
I hope, is better in the room, in the audience, than it is on this side of the room.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The bottom line of the question is, if we need to do something different, what do we need to do to inspire the commercial marketplace so that they are in a place where we can put humans on the top of the commercial rockets?
Great question, Wanda. I gave it some thought. I actually talked to some people from previous NASA programs. They says, how would you be able to stimulate competition in such a way that small providers have an opportunity to come and compete? And the interesting answer was, if you divide the business, you know, NASA frequently acquires huge, acquires in big pieces from large contractors. And believe me, I loved it when I was a Rockwell guy. We had a comfort of, for some, 25 years working on a major program. We took care of our customer, they took care of us, and it was very comfortable. And in retrospect, now I looked as a retired U.S. citizen, I'm thinking, is that the best thing for NASA? And I think if you want to stimulate industry, bring new wave of commerce to the business, you would put it up in small chunks whenever it's practical. Some things are not practical to do it. Identify small enough chunks and compete them. And I think if NASA starts doing this, you will find out that a lot of people will rise and compete, and some of them will fail, some of them will succeed, but you will have an essential creation of a new industry. I don't want to call it cottage industry because there is nothing about cottage about going to space, you know, but I think you would stimulate if you compete small chunks. That's my... Gary, you want to add anything to that?
That it was not intended to have an opinion about it, but rather just to remind us that as we contemplate an offerer that is purely commercially developed with a capsule and our humans on it, that we need to really make sure that we understand how much drilling down we're going to do, what our level of understanding needs to be about that, so that we can be comfortable with it. And just we need to recognize that.
It's okay for us not to be totally in agreement, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have a, you know, I asked that question yesterday. Sally, I'll get to you in a second, please. I asked the question, why would someone think that the American engineer, ambitious American engineer, working for a small company does less credible job than another American engineer working for a big company? It's you know, and that's a question. So, you know, this issue of drilling down and so you've got to comply with all of this stuff. It's wonderful. It makes it easy. It makes it compliance easy. But I think we ought to trust that people who want to get in the business, they are just as good as the rest of us, or they will be like the rest of us, and we ought to give them a chance. Go ahead, Sally. I'm sorry.
Sally, go ahead, then we'll pick up Jeff next.
My question's a follow-up on Wanda's. You know, I have my parochial interest, I guess, by the sub-team that I was assigned to. So my parochial interest today is on ISS. And I noticed just in your comments you have, next to one of the options, the dual launch Ares 5 Lite, but this may apply to others as well, ISS by commercials.
Right.
And I was struck by your comment based on your years of experience that the things that you always want out of a system are robustness and margin. And, I look to ISS now that, we've learned an awful lot more about it just in the last, those of us on the subcommittee feel like we all know almost as much as Leroy knows about ISS. I'm concerned that we're possibly going to find ourselves in a position where we might, as one of our options, recommend or pose as an option extending ISS, and perhaps this will be part of several of our options. But we don't propose with that option the opportunity to actually make use of ISS. In other words, we put it in jeopardy. We take away the robustness and the margin from ISS by the launch system that we choose for LEO access that's intended to satisfy the station and support the station. So I just wonder whether you could you'd comment on that and whether that fed into your considerations at all, or whether you're not to that stage yet.
I've got, I have an opinion on almost anything. Some of them are probably correct. A few of them might be correct. But I think that access to LEO, it's time, in my opinion, that access to LEO should be opened up to more newcomers. My God, NASA, great NASA has been to the moon, and we are sort of thinking that it's a big challenge for us to continue going to LEO. Let's try to turn it over to newcomers. Let them, learn how to do this. And this frees NASA. NASA has some of the most brilliant people. I wish I had some of the brilliance myself, but there are brilliant people doing apps. Apps to me is sort of a low value on the value chain work, and NASA is doing apps. I think NASA should buy apps from guys who do turning crank for a living, and direct these brilliant minds to some of the challenges that Ed Crowley is going to be talking about tomorrow. But as far LEO, I think commercial, if you give them a chance, they are smart. They are just as good as we were 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and I think they'll do a good job.
Agreeing with that completely, I guess I'd ask the question, how do we ensure a smooth transition between where we are today and where we want to be, which is commercial access, certainly for cargo, in as near a term as it can be provided to ISS. Because if we don't have that smooth transition, the program of record right now is a hard stop in the shuttle in 2010, and no government access to ISS until the next vehicle that you come up with. Right now, Ares 1 with Constellation in 2015 through 17, pick your favorite date. We said from the aerospace estimate, we kind of put our wisdom on it and said, well, it would be prudent to assume 2017 given the budget constraints that the program is under. And so that leaves us with essentially no insurance for ISS and waiting for the commercial providers who we've got complete confidence in their ability to produce systems. But the question is, given the technical delays and the cost, potential cost overruns and schedule overruns that we all experience in this business, how do we make sure that we're not leaving a system up in orbit for us and our international partners that actually requires a lot of servicing, a lot of mass brought up to it, and right now quite a bit of mass brought down. How do we ensure that we're not kind of detracting the margin and robustness from that system that we've already built by not having a nice smooth transition?
Well, Sally, I like your question. How do you affect smooth transition? I don't know what is a smooth transition. Every transition I've been through, it was a torture. It was unpleasant to face, almost impossible to go through, and at the end, you found out you were okay. I mean, that was my experience. It was we dragged our feet. It was unpleasant to go through, and we were okay in the end. So I don't know if I have any more wisdom, Sally, and I'm not making light of it, but every transition is difficult. On the last bullet on my chart was, hey, you agitate program of Wrapup. You are facing yourself through a rod of torment, and it's in terms of feelings, people, jobs, families, not to mention cost and schedule. All of that is, I don't know how to design smooth transition. Somebody smarter than me will have to try to figure that one out.
And a difficult transition is fine when your program is the one that's being affected by that difficult transition. But when your international partners and a different program are the ones that are being affected by that very difficult transition, that's when I think you need to step back and think just a little bit about whether there's something that you can do to kind of soften the impact of the transition.
Well, Sally, that's on the chart that you are looking at, the one that I showed a while ago. We do show some system that would affect somewhat easier transition, like some of the shuttle-derived version, obviously, because there is some synergy. You could make an argument if you pick a very much of a shuttle-derived vehicle, not loosely shuttle-derived vehicle, you could perhaps couple it synergistically with some level of extension of shuttle. And this is obviously one of the potentials here. And the question is that the right course of action? And the answer is still ahead of us, frankly.
I need to regain control of the meeting here. I saw Jeff, and then I saw Charlie.
Well, since we're allowed to deliberate now, this is exactly the topic I want to talk on. We're all in favor of commercial, but when we talk about the risks that the commercial entrants are facing, let's realize what we are asking them to do. We're asking if we put up maybe 20–25% of all the development money and no guarantee of any kind, just a hope that there'll be a market there for them someday, will they please come in and solve the nation's problem for us? And they might, which is a very pleasant thing to see. But if you want insurance, buy some. There are several more providers out there. They're not all small companies that are very interested in doing some kind of crew taxi. We've heard from many of them in fact-finding missions. And the costs of turning on one or two more of those as parallel paths is a rounding error in the cost of some of the other programs that we're sustaining. Furthermore, the spectrum is not, well, we'll be glad to use them when they show up on one end, and NASA will design every nut and bolt of the vehicle on the other end. There's a huge spectrum in between, one of which might include, that I think we need to strongly think about, is some kind of government-furnished equipment, small human-rated booster. Because a very large risk element in these programs is the question of whether or not new entrants with new spacecraft who are also developing new boosters can assure NASA that their astronauts will be safe to fly on these things early in their flight history. But that's not the only option. We have the option for a very small amount of money to think about human rating something already in the marketplace today that has already got NRO payloads on it and already has government insight and oversight, and then offering that as a service to people who want to do crew taxis. And that's a huge risk reduction element. And now you're looking at the question of, something I got to say about commercials, very briefly. The commercial guys do have more problems than the government guys because we're always struggling for little tiny amounts of money, which means a lot of us are going to fail. But the way that you get success out of commercial efforts is you don't just bet on one horse. You bet on the field and you pick the horse that wins. And if you want that to work, you got to have a lot of horses.
Charlie.
There we go. This whole discussion has prompted a reflection on my part that I think might be an important task for us on the integration part of the committee, General Lyles. As I listen to this whole discussion, whether NASA should be aggressive technically and move beyond LEO and so forth, I reached the conclusion myself that for cargo access to LEO, the most important technology is no longer engineering, it's policy. Whether or not you want to stimulate a commercial market, how you're going to deal with the fact that there will be a sort of an international maritime fleet competing or cooperating with our commercial capacity, the role of government-furnished equipment in the transition, the possibility that other elements of the United States government will be interested in a sort of a resupply capacity to LEO, suggests to me that the most important thing that the government can do beyond NASA to stimulate the commercial market is to straighten out the ground rules for COTS, the degree of government investment therein, make specific the role that government-furnished equipment will play during the transition, how we would propose to deal with the boundary, with a new international set of suppliers that includes not only the Russians with whom we know how to work, but now in addition spacefaring nations such as Japan and Europe, and how we will deal with our international interests in competition, if you will, or at least in the interface with our commercial interests. And so I think the most important thing that can happen, and this, you wouldn't think of making a new policy if you thought that IOC were just going to be 3 or 4 years away, but now we're looking at 2017, looking at 7 to 9 years. We're looking at a whole decade's provision for a whole decade. So I think the policy technology is the one that's the most important at the present time for that problem.
Good point. Please, Chris.
This is just to follow up on some of the recent comments. Bo has laid out a set of possible options for launch vehicles. We need to always remember that we're locking the nation in to 30 or 40 years of choice. And however critical the near-term problems we face are with respect to closing the gap and if we choose to extend station, making sure that we can extend station, that's an issue that we face in the next decade. And yet, the decisions we make, we have to live with for another 30 or 40 years. So, you know, it's understandable given the time and budget pressure we're under that we're going to be pushed towards making decisions that solve our short-term problem, and everything about the way Washington works is going to align with that. And yet we can't let that short-term, the need to solve that short-term problem lock us into a very suboptimal solution for the long term. So we need to keep that discriminant in mind.
Very important caution. Let's see, I'll ask my questions, and if no one else has any that they want to ask right now. The first one, Gary, I think I should address this to you, Bo, if that's all right. It pertains to the chart you showed of the program budget versus time, and it appeared that you had attributed the decline from the ESAS anticipated funding to budget cuts. And my question is, was the ESAS anticipated funding ever an official budget line, or was that just a want from the program office?
We see where we are today, but I mean, honestly, our attribution of the time is as reflected just in the bottom line from the original program record, and I would actually have to get back to the committee on, you know, what the earliest congressionally approved profile was and how close that was to the ESAS line. I'll be happy to provide that. I'm sure Jeff knows I don't have that with me, but it was mostly a function of where we are today with regard to the stated IOC.
Gary, if you could do that, that'd be good. I'm trying to understand cause
yes, sir.
Here of issues. My second question comes back to human rating, and for the older guys in the room and gals in the room, I think back that we did human rate Titans and Atlases, which were designed probably with nowhere near the reliability in mind that the COTS vehicles are being designed today. And I guess I'd like, you said that it's a very tough thing to human rate, and I agree with that. But I guess in view of the experience on Atlas and Titan, can you give us any more insight? And are we making this even harder than it has to be?
Our work on looking at human-rated EELVs as much as 3 years ago, the approach we took was to simply take the NASA standard and apply it. And then as Ares 1 and Orion came into development, we came into a better understanding of how NASA was applying that standard, because it allows for changes and waivers and ways of accomplishing what the standard calls for. So all I can say, Mr. Chairman, is with regard to our looking at these alternative vehicles, we tried to make our assessments as best we could based on how the human rating standard is being applied today in the Ares 1 Orion constellation, believing that that reflects NASA's very best thought about what should be done and how hard it is. We ask ourselves that question a lot about, isn't it simply a function of reliability and maturity and availability and those kinds of things, or are we making it too hard? But we deferred to how NASA was implementing it, realizing that as they proceeded into the development of Ares 1 and Orion, they gave that subject a lot of thought. So rather than us getting into a policy debate, we tried to apply that standard as best we understood it to other systems.
You know, a lot of it has to do with, you know, Leroy, you always stated how comfortable you're flying on Soyuz. NASA standards is a very nice plateau for some things that we wrote down from, you know, from our experience. But it's all about good engineering. You want to have a little structural safety factor greater than 125 to get yourself comfortable. Redundancy is important so you don't fail. And if you fail a launch vehicle, launches satellites, and I've done that, you know, it costs you increased insurance rates. You know, in this case, it's a tragedy for the nation. So you have to be a little more prudent. You have to automate how you shut down liquid propulsion. You know, in a satellite launching, you go until you fail, because there is no other, you know, there is no cause for aborting. Of course, if you fly human, so there are things that you do as a good engineer, and yes, they, by the way, most of them coincide with NASA standard. You know, and in fact, recently, NASA, I think, did something smart, is relative to the fault tolerance. Says, how about looking at the system reliability by looking at the component reliability, and let that drive you the fault tolerance rather than simply declare too fault tolerant like we did on shuttle. We are a little smarter today. So I think you can take the document and design to it, or you can use good engineering judgment and you will be equally safe. That's my thought.
Thank you. You know, I guess we'll take two last words quickly, but on this topic, Leroy, I wanted to ask you, you're the one who's lived with this kind of thing, particularly Russian launch vehicles and human rating. You have any insights you want to share with us?
Well, I agree with Bo, and I think everyone would agree that you know, foreign launchers aren't necessarily designed to the same standards, or they're just designed to different standards. And I have to admit that in the very beginning of working with the Russians, I was a little skeptical, but as I went over there and learned their processes, got to actually meet the people working on the vehicles, went and watched the vehicles being made and the care that was being put into it, got to learn their systems and their engineering. I became extremely confident in their system, because the engineering that Bo's talking about, very simple, pragmatic system, very, very robust, high-quality control where it counted. So I agree with Bo. It's not just a matter of designing to a document. And in fact, some of the debriefs that I came back with after station, talking about some of the things we do, not with launchers, but with just how we operate the station, you know, we stick to the letter of the law instead of sometimes looking back and using judgment and saying, okay, the letter of the law doesn't really make sense. We're wasting a lot of resources and time doing things to the letter of the law rather than to the intent.
Good insight. Let's see, last comment on this particular part of the meeting. Ed, you get the last word.
Norman, Bo, I was just going to comment that as we look across this array of possible launch vehicles and combinations of launch vehicles that we have in front of us, and how they fit into the recommendations that we make to the White House, I think there's an important thing that we've heard over and over, and I think Gary alluded to it, Bo has alluded to it, is that there's been a fair bit of churn in this business within NASA in the last decade. And I think especially here at Marshall this is felt. The Space Launch Initiative, the orbital space plane, then on to Orion. There's been a lot of cycles of this that we've lived through recently. And I think we have to keep this in mind in our current deliberation and be careful that if we make recommendations that displace the current path, they're very well-founded and almost indisputably correct. That it isn't the View Graph rocket versus the rocket that we know something about. We've actually invested a lot as a nation in the last decade in spaceflight. We've been provided that by NASA in real GDP-corrected terms. And we want to make sure that we either give the workforce something they can really do and deliver with pride, or propose something that is indisputably better than that.
Mr. Chairman, Ed, you know, stability is a wonderful thing. And if you if you destabilize yourself, you better go to something that is so much better, for the very simple reason that whatever you went to is going to look very much like what you walked away from. I have lived through that over and over and over. You say, I've got too many problems. I've got this new thing that looks so much better. I will embrace it. And 2 years later, you are hyperventilating like you did on the previous program. So my bottom line is, if you change, you better change to something. You should change to something so much better that is overwhelming.
Well, that's terrific, and I warned the audience. And Gary, thank you very, very much, and will you express our appreciation to your entire team for their effort. We've still got more to do, as you know, but we've got 34 days. And
also, thank you, Gary, and thank you for flying into Huntsville. We had a little mechanical problem, and I thought I was going to do this briefing, and I didn't want to.
That's what happens when you don't have reserves.
Let the record show let the record show that the airplane had the mechanical problem, not Gary.
Oh, okay. Bo, thank you. That was very well done. And one thing I got a note here for you, that there's a group waiting outside the door from the ops that would like to talk with you.